Hello there, we're back for my last installment talking about multiple choice tests. And today I want to talk just a little bit, it won't be long. I want to talk a little bit about how you can use multiple choice tests as a tool to help train your students for standardized tests. I'll also have a few things to say about standardized tests in general. The first thing I want to say about using multiple choice tests, I think it's a good idea to use the Scantron technology. Now, for anybody who doesn't know what a Scantron is, if you think back to taking those standardized tests, and most of us have done it now, most living people in the United States have taken a standardized test, which is pretty remarkable. You used a number 2 pencil on a certain kind of heavy cardstock, and you were to color in either a circle or a square or something like that with your number 2 pencil. And it was a timed test. Standardized tests are typically timed, although some of them now have gone to allowing students to take as long as they like on them. But generally speaking, that kind of test is a mechanism all its own, and I think it's helpful for students to encounter it in a classroom setting and get an opportunity to be successful with it before they have to encounter it in the longer and more high stakes setting of the standardized tests like the ACT or the SAT. Sorry about the ums. I realize now that I have a habit with nows and ums, so I'm going to try to work on that. That's for the future. The standardized test, Scantron, that technology is available in a lot of schools. In fact, the last 2 schools I've worked in both had Scantron readers. And talking about that, I want to pay special attention to the technology for just a moment. Because if you understand the technology, you'll be better at coaching your students about it, and you'll be better at catching little things that they might do with it. The Scantron doesn't actually use light. The traditional Scantron technology tests the thickness of the paper. That's why a number 2 pencil is necessary. The Scantron machine is calibrated to measure the thickness change in a paper laid down by the thin sheet of graphite that goes onto the paper when a student answers a question. Now, if students are used to dealing with these, they learn quickly certain things. You should not try to give 2 different answers to the same Scantron question. In other words, if B looks right and D looks right, don't try to color in both to try to get it right. The Scantron will automatically mark that wrong because when it reads 2 marks, it says, well, you're just guessing, so no, that's wrong. The other thing is, that's why it's so important to make sure it's neat and tidy. If you have a stray pencil mark on the paper, then it will read that and it will mark it wrong. You can also now calibrate most Scantron machines to mark the right answer on the answer sheet with a little bit of ink. What I found with some of the earlier Scantron readers was my students would try to chisel a few extra points by getting their test back. They get their Scantron back, and then we go over the answers, and then they'd mark the correct answer where they left it blank, because the Scantron will mark blanks as wrong as well. So, so you can now get Scantrons that will mark the spot with ink so that if a student tries to do that, you can see that the graphite is on top of the ink. And that won't work. They got it wrong. So practicing with the mechanism is good because it makes it less tension-inducing when they go into the standardized test. Standardized tests feel high stakes, even in some cases where students really do not have to worry about them. But you need to prepare them so that you can, as much as possible, reduce the anxiety, because anxiety can interfere with performance. And you don't want any student facing those tests to have a bad performance simply because they're unfamiliar with the mechanism. So get them used to that old number 2 pencil. Teach them about how the answers work, that the graphite lays down a little extra layer, and that's why they need to be neat and tidy with their tests and not make stray marks. And they need to keep track of the numbers. I think that's one of the most challenging things for some students, is if they skip an answer thinking they'll come back to it, they get their marking off, and then they just feel desperate and miserable. So it's important that they get used to keeping track, that when they're marking the answer to number 7, they're on number 7 on the answer sheet every time, checking to make sure they're doing it right. Now, here's the problem, I think, with standardized tests and with multiple choice tests, and why we have to be careful about the ways we interpret them. Standardized tests do not differentiate between difficult and easy questions. Students get the same amount of credit for getting a difficult question right as they do for getting an easy question right. And there's almost no way to get around that. So they don't really differentiate between the inclination of a student who might think not very deeply about an easy question that they sense is an easy question, and then spend a lot of time contemplating the difficult question. When I used to coach kids for standardized tests, I'd remind them of this and say, go through and answer. If you can keep track of the numbers and the letters and all that, go through and answer those easy questions first. The easy questions are going to yield you just as many points as the difficult questions. And that's a problem because, of course, in our real lives, the difficult questions are pretty important. The other problem with the standardized test and with weighing it too much is it's simply too small a sample. If you put the standardized test in the context of a student's academic life, it's one day, and even an extensive standardized test is not going to allow the student to respond to as many questions as a semester in a class where they receive these questions on a weekly or bi-weekly or even monthly basis. There's simply way more questions and way more work going into getting their GPA than there is into getting a score on a standardized test. What standardized tests were originally designed to do was to find people in rural or distant schools that were highly gifted that maybe wouldn't have gotten the attention they probably deserved because they were in the schools they were in. Schools on the East Coast are highly favored. Private schools are highly favored. Private schools with very expensive tuitions are highly favored on these standardized tests. Heck, I'll give you an example. There was a Dallas school teacher that taught at the AP convention, the Advanced Placement Convention, who taught AP classes in a private Dallas school. And it turned out that he was also writing AP test questions. Now that's a conflict of interest. He shouldn't be allowed to do that. If he's teaching those classes, then he shouldn't be writing those questions, because then he teaches his kids to answer those questions. And even if he thinks he's Captain Ethical, it's not ethical. Because even if you don't mean to do it, you're going to do it. And that's why he got 4s and 5s consistently. So, and if you don't understand that talk about AP, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. But here's the thing. In the end, those tests, like grades, are not as significant as the day-to-day work, because the day-to-day work is cumulative. Those tests do not teach students anything. They are an evaluation of students, not an instruction. And instruction is far more potent than simple evaluation. Students who experience things, who generate work, who answer questions, learn more, grow more, and are able to contribute more. I know that in our present climate, it's really hard to think about the nuts and bolts of learning. Right now we have this situation where the Department of Education, a federal department, is under attack, and I'm still not quite sure why. I can't quite follow the problem. None of the people who are objecting to the department seem to be objecting to it for the reasons that would make sense to me as someone who taught in public school. So I sense that it's just sort of a political football, and I sense that the people who are in charge of it right now don't value public education because they are not involved in it. They are people that went to private schools and used private schools and did not spend any time in the public education arena. The thing is, they depend on it utterly. The public education arena in the United States is what gave us one of the most powerful economic engines in the world, and it did it totally accidentally. Public education was not designed to make a great workforce. It was originally designed just to protect children from being exploited by unethical parents. It was to end child labor. Child slave labor, if we want to use the actual appropriate term. So the fact that not only did it protect children, it made great adult workers who did all the stuff. I mean, all the stuff. People you work with every day and don't even realize that part of why they are good at what they do is they went through school and learned things like how to work, how to get jobs done, how to communicate with others. Those are all significant things, and we depend on it from our fellow citizens every day of our lives. So, I don't know if the Federal Department of Education is doing a good job. I don't know if it's doing a bad job. I haven't considered it for about 5 years. But I do know this. People making decisions about it should be people that are versed in what's going on, and not people that are more versed in entertainment and wrestling. So, hopefully tomorrow I'll have my first live interview. Keep your fingers crossed, and I hope to see you then, you gorgeous people.